Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Radiant Digital Ventures and Anonymatics webinar, UPETS No Code Universal Solution for PII Data Protection. I am Josh DuPont, the Marketing Manager here at Radiant, and I'll be your producer for today's webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to just take a few moments to make sure that everyone in the audience knows what to expect from this webinar and is familiar with the features of the webinar platform. This webinar will run about 20 minutes and we'll have an open Q&A with the audience after the presentation. If you have any questions, you can simply type your question into the chat and we will get to as many of them as time permits. Our guest speakers today are Gil Tadmore and Matt Fleck. It looks like we have a nice full room here today, so let's get started.
All right, thank you, Josh. So today we have a short and informative webinar to share with you. UPETS is our product, and it really stands for Universal Privacy Enhancing Technology Solution. So we prefer the acronym UPETS. We'll cover a little bit of background on data protection or PII protection and data privacy challenges, what enterprises really encounter in that space, and then how UPETS offers a solution for that with some use cases and demo. And we'll end with Q&A. The other interesting detail is in the time it takes to finish this webinar, you can actually install our containerized solution and begin to process your initial data set with full PII protection. So let's dive right into it and we'll show you how simple it is. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt, who will give us a little bit of background on the state of data privacy and PII.
Thank you, Gil. So data privacy may seem like a fringe concern to some people, but its requirements and obligations actually have a huge impact. Direct and indirect costs are soaring as privacy regulations are expanding worldwide. And for these reasons, and also that failure to comply can cost millions, data privacy is absolutely a board-level concern. Most importantly, it can stop ambitious data-driven projects before they even get started. Next slide, please. And then this has real consequences, because if you're not Google, Amazon, or Facebook, you're in competition with them data-wise. This is why being able to safely share and use data is critical. Organizations everywhere are sitting on a treasure trove of valuable data. But due to either the ever-growing data privacy restrictions or the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around what might happen, they just cannot leverage that data. So in the end, with costs soaring for using data, while at the same time, the value being obtained from that data is dropping. And this results in a huge loss of opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. So let's look under the hood a little bit and highlight some of the enterprise needs when extracting value from their data while fully maintaining regulatory compliance. And what enterprises typically encounter is a heavy lift on the technology side, both from a data management standpoint, as well as a security or data security standpoint. So the challenges really amount to an increasing cost and complexity associated with these multiple data pipelines, the risk of not protecting the PII properly or consistently, and then the lack of scalability and automation with all of that. On top of it, when you encrypt PII data, you end up with de-identified data that might have limited value in terms of matching or sharing. Well, this is what we call the PII integration gap. So where does this PII integration gap manifest itself? If we look at a typical enterprise, there are multiple applications, multiple data sources. We know that any given application can map to one or more data sources. These are where the data pipelines and their complexities come into play. We also know that data sources could be owned by many different data owners and sometimes external data owners if you're sharing data with a third party or a partner that you're collaborating with. So this increases the complexity in terms of negotiating who gets to share what, for what reason. Is the data in fact protected, and who's going to pay for the cost associated with that custom development to put this all together? And that's where the PII integration gap really manifests itself. Of course, there are traditional mechanisms that companies have been using to date related to ETL scripts, various security measures, developing custom applications and APIs associated with it. But then there's also a heavy lift and cost associated with maintaining and updating all these connections, because databases do change and applications also go through changes over time. So in the end, you're still missing out on the potential of extracting your value from data across the enterprise and with your partners. So how does UPETS really address the PII integration gap? If we look at the same enterprise example that we talked about earlier, a few applications, a few data sources, all within your firewall, nothing is left outside of your firewall. We install our containerized solution, and it has 3 basic steps. You connect the databases, you conduct an auto discovery of the tables and the PII elements or sensitive data elements within your databases. We create these auto-configured PII profiles, which then you can, of course, edit and change. And then the end result is we push that into and create a safe and anonymized data set or database at the location of your choice. And that's what the enterprise applications interface with and start using. So it's a very easy and simple process. It's also in near real time. And there's no code required here, no coding environment, as well as it's non-invasive. So let's look at some of the functions that we are addressing here. We already discussed these 3 basic functions where you connect a database, view the PII profile, or in fact, just send that data and create your anonymized and safe database output. So this is a very powerful PII protection mechanism. Really, with a few mouse clicks, you already get extensive protection for your data sets. But UPETS offers a lot more functions beyond that, and it really delivers an enterprise-wide PII protection hub. For that, we include this library of PII profiles that you can manage, automation that comes with it, so you can scale your ops. You can change your PII profiles on demand. You can map them to different databases and outputs as needed. And on top of that, you can monitor where you stand in terms of users, database sources and destinations, and coverage and compliance across your data sets, just to make sure that you didn't miss out on any PII attributes that are slipping through the cracks, so to speak. Here's a screen where we have the data owner logged in. And you can see I already selected a database and a profile, and I'm looking at the original data. This is a walkthrough, if you will, of the workflow in a manual fashion. But when we go and automate this through scheduling, of course, this is not required. But it does help the data owner make sure and validate that things are being processed properly. So if this is my original data set, I can click on the anonymized data, and then I get the results back where I can see where the PII profile that I prescribed is actually acting on the data sets themselves, and which ones are remain in the clear. In this example, country, of course, was left in the clear. But you can see there are various formats for doing the redaction, and then there's also an opportunity to do masking on top of redaction. To that extent, this screen actually shows the ability to now look at what the system auto-configured for you for every given PII profile that was generated, and then look at the actual PII elements, see what type was assigned to them, so that could change if it was assigned incorrectly. This is very useful also when you want to protect other sensitive data that is not considered standard PII. For example, a network IP address or an account balance. Any one of those attributes that exist in your data model could also be designated as an element that requires anonymization. And this is where you would configure all that, and then you have the options to look at redaction versus masking and select various output configurations for the output data that you would then send to the destination database. So let's tie what we learned about UPETS to a few practical everyday use cases. First of all, we start with multiple data sources, and each with various types of sensitive or PII related data. But all that stays behind your firewall. We do not move that and expose it in any way. we create these safe and anonymized data sets. So what can you accomplish once you have those safe and anonymized data sets staged somewhere? Well, for one, if you had an offshore testing team and you needed to send them a representative sample of your database for software testing, you could create that safe and protected database with redaction, anonymization, and all those combinations, and just send it to them because it will be PII safe and fully compliant. Likewise, if you have different teams of researchers or analysts that need to start developing algorithms or apply AI/ML models, or in fact create dashboards that need to be accessed by various stakeholders, you can safely give them a data set that is PII protected and removes all the sensitive data. Similarly, if you need to load some data into the cloud for some SaaS solution or cloud migration, you can maintain your original source data as is, where it's safe and protected behind the firewall, and create your safe and anonymized copy that you can then leverage in those kind of situations. And Matt, how about you? Any other examples of use cases you want to share?
Yeah, Gil, absolutely. And in fact, we had a new one come up yesterday in a customer conversation. And what it illustrates is that you don't have to pick one of these tiles. They can actually interact and you can combine them to solve even more complex problems. So after explaining what our solution did, the customer said, well, this sounds like it could really solve our data clean room problem. And it absolutely can, because it combines several of these tiles. For instance, you can use the UPETS and its ability to pull data out, do the pass-through anonymization, and put it in a repository where it can then be acted upon. It can do the cloud migration, load that data up into the cloud so it can be accessed by people outside the direct infrastructure if that's what you wanted to do. You can bring the data in from multiple parties and do third-party anonymous data matching, so you can augment the data anonymously. And when it's all done and you need to bring that data back, you can utilize the selective re-identification to take the results that were generated from your AI processes in the cloud by yourselves, by a third party, by whoever operated on completely anonymous data, and you can bring those back in and then act upon those results. So you can combine the capabilities as needed to solve some really complex problems.
Yep, thank you, Matt. So before we move into Q&A, let's recap on some key takeaways that we shared with you today. So with UPETS, you can easily create anonymized, safe data sets that are fully compliant, and then start using or sharing, if you're talking about external entities like Matt just mentioned, in a safe fashion, and really enable the use of the application of these various use cases in a practical sense, and then start beginning to extract value from your data. So if you're interested in trying this out, it's a very easy process. Just contact us. We can help deploy this solution directly to your destination of choice, location of choice. Your original data doesn't leave your premises, doesn't leave your firewall. We don't touch it, we don't change it. It's never exposed. And then we can show you how, we can guide you and show you in your environment how easy it is to attach a database. You'll select which one, run through the anonymization scheme, and generate that safe and anonymized data set literally within minutes once the container is set up. So with that, let's move into the Q&A session. I'll pass it over to Neil, who'll help moderate some of the questions that are coming in through the chat.
Great, thanks, Gil and Matt. That was absolutely fantastic. And while you were sharing all the capabilities of UPETS, we had a couple questions come in. So if it's all right with you guys, I'll just go ahead and read them. Gil, the first one I think is something you could best address. And that question is, how can we set up a pilot or proof of concept for our data?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned on the previous slide, this is a very easy process. If you were to test the waters and you want to have a live demo with us, and we can create even a simple Excel sheet that will kind of mimic what you're thinking about in terms of a data structure, that's easy to do. We can set up a virtual call like this and actually demonstrate the product right in front of your eyes and show you how easy it is to assemble and configure. But the better choice would be to deploy that container to your environment, as I mentioned earlier, you will connect it to your database, and we'll guide you through there. We'll be attached through a screen share session. We won't throw you into the deep waters by yourself, but we'll show you how easy it is and make you comfortable with the tool. And then within minutes, literally, you'll be able to see the anonymized data set result and see how useful it is for you.
Fantastic. And Gil, you may have slightly addressed this, but let's ask it explicitly again. And the question was, do we have to send you our data in order to anonymize it?
Yeah, definitely not. That will break the rules for PII protected data. We don't need to receive or store your sample data set or your original data set for that matter. Really, you should maintain, as you probably are today, your PII sensitive data behind your firewall with all the mechanisms, security mechanisms that you already have. And that, therefore, a simple proof of concept could be done with a spreadsheet. By the way, our tool can ingest, if you will, CSV files, JSON files for those proof of concepts or the research projects, let's say. But the ultimate power is when you connect to databases of any size and generate the safe and anonymized corresponding output database of any size. That's where it's ideal to be run in your environment.
Great. Matt, I think you might be able to handle this question. What kind of anonymization capabilities do you offer?
That's a great question. And one way to look at it, the quick answer is we have several, and I'll list those in just a moment. But the overlying philosophy of the anonymization and the re-identification, as well as the preventing of unauthorized re-identification, everything is geared and engineered, designed from the ground up to enable organizations to make full use of their data with all the PII removed. Everyone knows you can utilize data that has no identity information in it. You can utilize that because it's safe, it's anonymous. It just before this hasn't really been all that useful. But what this solution does is it provides the means by which you can get the full value out of all that data without it ever having that PII in it. So we can initially just completely redact all the PII information. So the column goes in, some customer ID, their name, their birthday, comes out. It's never seen again, but you can still utilize your data if it was there. We also have several very powerful means of data masking. It goes from a full profile level masking, where you can take multiple databases that have the same customer's information, and every time that customer will get a new name, a new ID, a new birthday that will be consistent across all the different sources. And that's really important when you're testing multiple systems and you need that data to coordinate just as it did in production. We also have different levels of masking if you just need to quickly change data, change symbols, really whatever else you need. And then on the other side, the selective re-identification. A lot of times when you're just encrypting data, if you give somebody the key to decrypt data so that they can use part of it, they have access to everything. With the selective re-identification, for any given workflow, only very specific PII values are allowed to be restored to the data, and that's completely within your control. And even if your environment doesn't allow it at all, it's technically impossible to do. So we've got you covered there as well.
Wow, fantastic. That's a pretty deep level of sophistication with both the anonymization and masking. Gil, and this is a last question, but I think you might be able to field this one. Considering this is a no-code solution, what enterprise configurability does UPETS offer?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's a good follow-on to a few things that Matt just described. So if you think of as we mentioned, the UPETS being the enterprise hub for PII protection, there are a few things that we want to make sure that the administrator or the data owner can configure with a few simple mouse clicks as they administer, if you will, this PII protection hub. One relates to users and their roles. So which users have which role and what the roles are allowed to do when it comes to viewing data or just viewing anonymized or safe data, what they can export and download, etc. The other has to do with the actual definition of types, how the auto AI rules would apply to the selection of a PII type and the appropriate action or anonymization action for that PII type. You can create these universal or general rules so that every time a database is identified and auto-discovered, these tables will, and attributes within these tables will get those selections pre-configured, so you can just edit them later or modify them or use them as is. Then there's a whole notion of related to your Vault, that the container that you install and the databases that are connected to it, how the license and subscription are being managed in terms of process and workflow, and what other actions you can take that user can take advantage of, much like Matt was describing just now with regards to the re-identification and what is allowed and who can do that at what point in time, as well as the types of actions you want to apply in terms of redaction versus anonymization. There's a whole long list of options available there. And if the particular enterprise wants to choose a smaller subset to make it consistent or streamlined, that's what the administrators can also configure. So it's a matter of selecting various parameters and checkboxes, and there's no code involved, as we mentioned, but then it makes it more consistent for the enterprise to run through all their data sets in a consistent fashion, but they can always tailor it for that particular output for a certain use case. If they wanted, for example, to generate a specific type of database for testing, they can easily do that. You can maintain the same columns in the original database, or you can even change columns in the output file. All these things are optional and configurable.
Great. Well, fantastic. And that's all the questions we have, but really great questions and so much more depth and clarity with your answers. Josh, can I turn it over to you to wrap things up?
Yeah, very, very nice. You can check the Radiant Digital Ventures and an Anonymatic website for a link to this recording. Again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Gil, Matt, and Neil.
Yep.
Have a good day.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.